How does the 7600 perform in Star Citizen? I picked up this card to test fluid motion frames, AMD's new feature. Then a couple of days later, after I spent £250, they decide to put it on the 6000 series anyway, so that money was wasted. But I've got the card, so we might as well test it and see how it performs. We're going to put it up against the 6600 mainly, and we're going to see if it still struggles with the same issue that that card does. We've had this problem where AMD cards, 8GB just doesn't seem to be enough in Star Citizen, even at 1080p. You have these slowdowns, these stalls, where you just lose frames, and it kind of killed the 6600. Is it the same with the 7600? Testing is all done on my main system. Check out the description for the full specs, but we are not CPU bottlenecked in any of this. The 7800X3D is powerful enough to outmatch the 7600 at 1080p, so we're all on the GPU here. First of all, let's look at ArcCorp. Things are looking good here. This is a good step up. This card, when it kind of was released, was kind of panned a bit. It's not that quick, it's not that good compared to some of the RX 6600 variants, but versus the base RX 6600 is actually quite an improvement in Star Citizen. In quantum travel, again, it's quite a leap, and it could be here. We know that AMD cards struggle a little bit with quantum travel itself, but it may be that the 7000 series actually copes quite a lot better than the 6000 series. Out in space, nothing really for the GPU, but again, quite a leap over the 6600. It's obviously near the 3080, but I mean, I should make clear, the 3080 is not struggling in any way in any of these tests. That is completely CPU bottlenecked in every single test we're seeing. Onto the Oven rooftop. This is a place where we test GPUs primarily because you've got the clouds in the background and they're pretty heavy. We are going to keep them on medium though, because very high clouds are just not recommended for any card really. They're absolutely brutal. And so you see here an improvement again over the 6600. The 7600 is a fair chunk better, and all these frames at 1080p are great. There's no complaints here whatsoever. Down in the city, the margin actually is not as high between the two cars. The 7600 is just a little bit ahead of the 6600 here, so again, maybe we're seeing an area where the architectural differences between those two cars and between the generations just don't make that much of a difference. But we'll get to the main event. We're back in Lawville, and we're going to see, does this card struggle with the same issues that the 6600 did? These stalls, these slowdowns, where performance just falls to pieces. And unfortunately, the answer is yes. You'll see in the results here, the 1% percentile FPS there is really low. It's actually lower than the 6600. I wouldn't read too much into that. That could just be the runs that I did, I was just unlucky. I don't think the card is necessarily worse than the 6600, but there is a significant issue here now we're finding with these AMD cards with 8GB. If you didn't catch the previous video, I'd recommend going and watch that. It goes into a bit more detail of what's going on here, but effectively we're running out of, it seems, VRAM, and the NVIDIA cards can cope with that. They can run much more efficiently with 6GB of VRAM, whereas the AMD cards, even with 8GB, they just can't cope. And in this scene in Lawville, it just has these huge slowdowns. I'll show you here on a FPS graph. Frame time graph we can show as well, but a bit harder to read. But for this FPS graph, you've got these moments where the game just completely judders right down to a really low frame rate, and on this run it happens a couple of times, and this last section here we're down to 8 FPS, and again, this just doesn't happen on NVIDIA cards anywhere near to the same extent. There are points where these 6GB cards on the NVIDIA side do suffer from frame drops, but they're just nowhere near this. What I found is that if you first load into the game and just go into Lawville, it will be fine. You won't get these slowdowns. But the way I test, and I didn't really want to completely change the way I test just for these cards, but I go in and out to servers, and I don't completely close down the game every single time that I do a new run. If you were to completely close the game every time you came out of a server, I think this issue wouldn't be there. But you'll see in this test, you've got my first run that I did here when the game was first open, and you see that performance doesn't have these massive slowdowns. The 1% percentile FPS is much better, and overall average therefore is better. But the average, the runs below, is the average of all the runs that I did, and it's just lower. And so it is avoidable. You can, if you have one of these cards, if you just keep closing the game every time you drop out of a server, I think you'd probably be able to avoid these slowdowns. That's my experience so far with this testing, but it's just not ideal at all. And so overall, this card again performs pretty well. It's a good 1080p card, but because of these issues, how can you recommend any of these cards? Again, I'm going to keep hold of these things and I'm going to test them again when we get Vulkan, because when we get Vulkan, everything potentially could change. Also, at some stage, CRG are going to give us more memory options, and that might be when Vulkan comes, where you can manage basically what your GPU is doing. You could turn down certain settings and, in theory, manage the amount of VRAM that you're using, and that might make a difference. I got a 6700 XT on its way. It might be here. I might pop it in the footage by the time I make this video. And so I will test that. That's got 12 gigabytes of VRAM, and so that's going to be the follow-up. And we're going to see basically, does that solve all the issues? Can you get past the fact that this huge architectural issue seems to be there for AMD? It's a shame because these cards are cheap now. I picked up this for £250. The 6600 I picked up for £150, something like that. It was really cheap, and so they are viable options. But you might actually be better off picking up an older NVIDIA card potentially, because they don't have these big slowdown issues.